just a sec. Okay, so as Phil mentioned, this is the fourth in our topic exploration meeting series. We have sort of gone through all of the priority topics that we discovered through our online survey. So we used the feedback that we got through the survey that we ran from about early September to late October, and sort of came up with these 4 priority topics to have further discussion about. In terms of what we're planning to cover this meeting, I'll go through just a brief overview of the planning process that we've taken thus far and some next steps. And then we'll go through some of the survey results that are pertinent to the topics that we're discussing this evening. We'll talk a little bit about current recreation facilities, the department that manages those facilities, and then some known issues and opportunities that we discovered through the first phase of this process. We'll then, as I mentioned, have some brief question and answer period, and then we have prioritization exercises out in the hallway that we really need you to fill out and get your feedback on. So just to give you a little bit of an overview, we are currently in this light blue phase, the public engagement phase. As Phil mentioned, we spent the spring and summer going through and reviewing existing conditions data. So really trying to understand the current makeup of the town right now as it pertains to all of the topic areas that we discussed throughout the comprehensive plan. So then we moved in September to public engagement. This phase is really important. It's when we end up trying to discover the community's vision and values for the next 10 years. And we did that through the online survey. We also have a project website. We had a community open house. I went to a number of tabling events at local businesses just to meet people where they were and have conversations there. And then we will be having some further public engagement in the new year to really start to refine our vision and talk more in depth about land use for the future. After that, the committee will come back together and really get into the meat of the plan, which is the policy making and the development of goals, policies, and actions. So that'll be when we start to craft policy to actually plan for the community's desired future as we discover it through this public engagement process. And we anticipate that a final plan document will be available for public review in about September or October of 2025. It will have to be adopted locally. And then there's also a required state review process as well. So just to give you a little bit of an overview of what we heard from the survey, we had an online survey, as I mentioned, that ran earlier in the fall, and we received about 250 responses to that survey. What we heard from folks was a lot of information on outdoor recreational activities and how important those were. So we actually asked people to rank from a number of attributes. So how important are the following attributes, of which there was a list of about 13, to making Orono a place where you will want to live during the next 10 to 20 years. And as you can see, 70.5% of people said that access to outdoor recreational activities was very important to them for the future, and 21.7% said that that was somewhat important. And then at an attractive natural setting, about 78% of people said that that was very important to them, and about 19% said that that was going to be somewhat important for the future. We then started to get a little bit more detailed, and we asked about sort of current access to recreational amenities. So we asked folks to indicate if access to waterways for members of the public was adequate, somewhat adequate, or not adequate, or no opinion. And as you can see, many people had said that access to waterways was adequate, or at least somewhat adequate, which means we're doing fairly well. But then we asked people, what might improve, and a lot of people said, things like multi-use trails or sidewalks or increased signage or wayfinding to figure out where these places actually are. That was something that ended up being very important to people that took our survey. And then we also asked people to indicate what they wish was within a 10-minute walk from their house. And as you can see, about 49% of people said that open space or trails was very important to them, that they wish that was closer to them. And then a public park for active recreation. So like a playground or a ball field or any sort of active recreation space, about 36% of people said that was important. And as you can see, there were a number of other important priorities as well. So to talk a little bit more, I want to sort of set the stage and help us understand where we are. So the town actually owns 8 parks, and 5 of those have water access. So as people indicated, water access in their mind is pretty good. But there are no water access points that meet ADA accessibility requirements, meaning that there is no water access point actually suitable for those with disabilities, according to the requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I should note that that's an important point to make because it might end up changing how the town invests in these water access points. So when we make a change to water access points, we need to bring them up to ADA standards. So if there was a change needed to any of these points, we would need to fix this issue. And then in terms of the department, so the department's operational budget, and that includes the pool and after school programs, was about $387,000 as of FY 2025, so our current fiscal year. I should note that, as you can see, that's fairly low compared to surrounding communities. So we expect that Bangor would have a much higher budget. They are also maintaining more facilities, but even in some of our other comp communities like Hampden and Herman, we rank, fairly low in terms of the actual budget. So we're doing a lot with quite a little. The department is staffed with 2 full-time staff members, but because of sort of a variety of issues, the volunteers and the volunteer hours of the town really make up a significant number of labor hours and help the town staff deliver services at essentially next to no cost. So the current range of programming would really not be possible without volunteers like the many sports coaches that come and coach our teams, the beautification committee, the trails committee, which does a lot of trail planning work, student volunteers from both the high school and UMaine, and then outside nonprofit organizations, especially the Orono Land Trust, Orono VZ Little League, all of these partners that make the range of recreational amenities that the town offers possible. So to that end, we have had conversations at the committee level about sort of what our recreational needs might be in the community, and we've come up with some issues and opportunities that as we see it as a committee, and I'll be curious as to what folks sort of think about these documented issues. But one of the issues that we came up with was the issue of informal trails. So many trails in the community aren't necessarily formally recognized. So by that, I mean owned or managed by either the town or the Orono Land Trust, because they're located on private property and there's no rights or easement access or anything to actually maintain those trails. Also, there are many trails on private property that, again, lack formalized easements. So that poses an issue if the landowner changes or if somebody sells the property and they change their mind about access. So owners, who change their mind would end up sort of limiting our trail network throughout the community. I just also want to note that owners may allow the trail to cross their property currently, but they don't allow the portion of the trail that's on their property to actually be listed on any maps, which ends up limiting accessibility and connectivity to the overall trail system and creating some major safety issues. So if, the fire department, for example, can't see on a map that there is a trail there, that could pose a huge issue if somebody, is lost or needs help on that portion of the property. To that end, one of the sort of issues, but also opportunities, is just more trail management planning. So many of the town-owned trails lack formalized trailheads or parking areas, or they aren't connected to sidewalks. So they sort of end up functioning more as neighborhood walking paths rather than actual formalized and interconnected trail systems. And one of the things that the Parks and Recreation Department hears a lot is that they're not necessarily user-friendly or accessible. People are actually getting lost. It's not, connected to anything else, and it's not clear where the trail is or isn't. The town's trails committee sort of understands this issue and wants to better understand areas that are difficult to traverse, issues with access to the trails, the width of trails, and spur trails, which I'll talk about more in a second. And they want to create some more accurate maps of the trail systems, because that was one of the issues that we ran into when we were doing our data analysis. Was the GIS maps that we have available for the trails aren't necessarily updated, and they don't accurately reflect where current trails are, because of the other issues that I've discussed on informal trails. So the issue with spur trails is essentially that when somebody tries to create a trail from their property and then connects it to a potentially existing trail system, that's what we call a spur trail. And that becomes an issue because of the access issues, the not being mapped and all of that. And also the town ends up getting calls about, why isn't this trail being maintained? And we don't actually have any authority to maintain those kinds of trails. So they're sort of private trails that people just sort of create for the purpose of connectivity, but it ends up posing a broader issue. Switching gears a little bit to talk about our actual recreation amenities. So we did identify an issue with a lack of toilet facilities, and at first glance that might seem kind of a silly issue, but with no permanent public toilets with plumbing at any of the town-owned facilities, that actually limits how long people can reasonably use the town's recreational amenities before having to leave to seek restrooms. In the summer, we do have some porta potties at Webster Park, Gould's Landing, and Brownies Park. So, in the summer, it's a little bit less of an issue, but the lack of toilet facilities is really a limiting factor to use of the town's existing facilities throughout the year. And then one of the things that the Comprehensive Plan Committee wanted to talk about more was sort of the need for a global assessment of recreation needs. So as you can see, if you take a look at our population and demographics poster, there's some projected shift in demographics over the next 10 years. And that might lead to potentially new programming needs. So we're projecting that Orono's population gets slightly older, as in the proportion of our community that is above 65 is projected to grow over the next 10 years, while some of the other age groups are projected to shrink slightly. So that might lead to new programming needs for seniors or older adults. The Comp Plan Committee also identified that there's really no programming for older children and teens, like not a formalized teen center or a place where teens could really feel safe hanging out after school. And there's also no lower stakes, like non-sports related programming being offered currently for children. So one of the things that is being discussed is sort of the need for a global assessment of recreation needs to better understand community desires in this area. And we're hoping to kind of start that conversation with our posters out in the hallway and our activities out in the hall. But I think it's a broader conversation that might need more work throughout the planning process. And then I touched on some of our municipal facilities, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about natural resources briefly. So I'm just pulling up. Okay, so as you can see, this is a map of our community. And one of the things that we needed to do as a comprehensive plan committee in phase 1 was really go through and try to understand what our current makeup of natural resources is. So, and that will help us as we sort of move through the planning process and get to a point where we can have conversations about where growth should be directed versus what areas might be better being conserved. So, in general, this map here is showing the conservation land currently in Orono, and some of this is just town-owned land, not permanently conserved land like through the Orono Land Trust. So I should note that it's currently conservation areas, but that is not necessarily a requirement, versus land that is owned through either a fee easement, owned by the Orono Land Trust, or has an easement on it through the land trust, is sort of land that's permanently conserved. So a lot of those areas are sort of out in the more rural parts of the community. But there's some land here that I think you're all generally familiar with, you know, some neighborhood trail systems and things like that. So one of the things that we will end up asking you to do is sort of identify what places are sort of special places to you in terms of because they provide a recreational opportunity or are conservation areas or potential conservation areas. They're providing a natural resource or a scenic view. And so we'll ask you for some more information on those things. And then we also have, as I mentioned, the opportunity to sort of rank what your priorities are. So we need to have a better understanding of what folks want to see in terms of sort of priority recreation amenities, especially as it pertains to outdoor recreation and natural resource conservation in the community. And I should note that this is sort of the beginning of this conversation. We have to have conversations which are planned for early February on future land use in the community. And this will end up sort of guiding that conversation as we return talk in more detail. So I would ask you that if you haven't already had pizza, please help yourself. We do have a variety of activities out in the hallway. I'll be out there to answer any questions if you want to talk one-on-one. But we do really need your feedback on those posters. That's really what we'll be using to prioritize goals and policies in the next phase of our work. If you have any other questions at this point, I would love to answer those. And I would encourage you as well to visit our project website. And this is where we've also posted more of this part of the map that I showed, but also a lot of other maps pertaining to natural resources, and also where future events will be posted and made available for the public.